Hello and welcome to No Wrong Choices, a podcast about the adventures of life that explores the career journeys of successful and interesting people. I'm Larry Samuels, soon to be joined by the other fellows Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea. If you enjoy our show, please support us by clicking follow on your podcasting platform and by giving us a 5-star rating. You can also learn more about us and connect by visiting our website at NoWrongChoices.com or look for us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now YouTube by searching for No Wrong Choices. This episode features Grammy Award-winning recording and mix engineer Ariel Borujow. Ariel has worked with countless respected musicians, including Puffy, Madonna, and Andrea Bocelli. Larry Shea is a friend and former colleague of Ariel's. You're the perfect person to set up this discussion.
Yeah, Ariel's a special guy. I'm excited about this. I had the chance to work with him a number of years ago at this point, and I was in the music business for about 10 years, and I used to hire recording engineers, as a manager of a recording studio, in this case, the Cutting Room, which was a great place. I mean, so many special albums were made there, and so many special artists came through there, and you needed special people like Ariel to take that client and lead them through that artistic process and give them what they need. And that wasn't easy, because as a recording engineer, I mean, first and foremost, you need great ears. You got to have great ears, but you also need to put on the hats of psychologist. You got to be great with people. You're a musician. You're a business person. There's a lot of independent contracting in this business, and you have to have a tireless work ethic. And Ariel had all of those things. So I was thrilled I was able to work with him. I hired him a number of years ago, and he never disappointed me. And I'm super excited to hear how this dream started for him, and that he could share this magical thing with us, because I know, because I tried to do it, this is not an easy path by any stretch of the imagination. So excited to hear his story.
I'm always interested in hearing when guys like this talk about like that fine line between what it means to, hone a craft, like you're actually learning a craft. And then when you get to a certain point in your craft, then it becomes art. That's really what this is all about, because that's really what it means to be kind of a recording engineer and a mix engineer. Because at some point, right, you're learning all about how the dials work and what the faders do and how to set up a room properly, etc. And that's what really Ariel has done. Before we can even talk about what engineers do, this is what this man has done throughout his career. He's had this opportunity to probably do all these things. But then, at what point does it really become an art form? Because that's really where then, the albums that we've purchased over the years, the songs that we listen to, that's really the end product that we listen to. That's the art form that we're always wondering how do they make that song sound so great? How do they make that album sound so cohesive from top to bottom? That's the art form. That's where that comes into play.
Yeah, I'm really eager to hear about that. And the other thing that on my mind is, how do you get in? So many of these jobs are coveted, whether it's in sports or music. There's so many different roles and careers and genres that people are just dying to get into. There's so many folks vying for so few opportunities. How do you stand out? How do you break in? And what is that journey? And what is that sacrifice you have to make to be that person that manages to get through the door and then into a role or onto a path that leads somewhere?
Yeah, we love talking about jobs where it's only a few people who make it through the forest, right? And actually come out the other side and are doing something that they dreamed about doing their whole lives. And I know as a recording engineer studying, it's an intimidating looking profession. Like you look at a board and you're like, oh my God, how the heck do you know what all those knobs and buttons do? I got to tell you, as a former engineer, that's the least of your concerns. As with all things with us and with trying to chase your dreams, it's about people wanting to work with you. It's about being a good person. It's about relationships. And I'm sure Ariel is going to tell us all about every bit of that.
Here is Ariel Borujow.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on, Ariel. This is a rare treat for me. To have one of my, good friends from back in the day. I managed Cutting Room recording studios, and at a certain point, our worlds collided and we met. And I'm just always been thrilled with your professional career from a distance. So thanks for sharing some time and coming on and talking to us about it. I want to get started with, for our audience purposes, there's a lot of different kinds of engineers in this business, in the audio engineering business, but you are specifically a mixing engineer. So what distinguishes a mixing engineer from someone who's a mastering engineer or someone who's just cuts vocals, etc.? Like, give us exactly what it is that you are and what you bring to the world.
So what I do specifically now, I mean, I did come up as a recording engineer, and I do believe that if you are going into the engineering field, audio engineering field, that you need to come up as a recording engineer, and you need to understand what an instrument sounds like, what a voice sounds like, how to record it properly. And this sort of starts training your ear on how specific sounds kind of fit into the puzzle. So what I do is I get the entire song when it's finished, and I sort of, what I like to call, create the emotion of the record. So for instance, you know, when you hear a song and you hear like a very lush reverberation on the vocal, that's usually the mixing engineer that handles that job. And that's just a small piece of it. The role has changed tremendously since I've worked with Larry Shea back in the day, where, well,
you should refer to him as Dr. Larry Shea.
I've always referred
sound engineer at large.
I've only referred to him as Mr. Shea. So
no, it's apparently it's Dr. Shea. This is all we ever get from him. So
That's right.
It's Dr. Shea.
I'm going to change that. So when I worked with Dr. Shea, it was different because what would happen was the opportunities came when you were a recording engineer. And the reason that happened was because in the late 90s, early 2000s, you were still working on these big analog consoles where the artist would come in, they would record a song, the engineer would get to do what was called a rough mix. And that was sort of your time to shine, to say, hey, I could make this sound a little bit better than what it sounds like now. And sometimes the artist would say to you, hey, that sounds great. Have you mixed before, or do you want to mix this record? Which, believe it or not, my first mixing credit came from the cutting room, from that specific, from that reason itself, was that I got a chance to do a rough mix and I got to mix a record. But what happens now, where things have changed, is that now with the rise of the home studios and the computers, everyone has the same opportunity. Everybody has the same tools. What distinguishes me from the rest, or an artist or producer, is the fact that my ear is tuned to just making things sound right. So what happens is, where you used to spend a day of recording and then a rough mix, the artist could actually be sitting with that same song for months at a time, just tweaking their version of a rough mix. By the time you get it, we like to call it demoitis. The artist has tons of demoitis. They've been sitting on that song forever. So for you to come in, the art is not to make it sound better. It's to keep the feel of the record, but make it sound better off of what they've already created in their proper studio, if that makes any sense.
All right. So, Ariel, did you start out as a musician, or did you or did your love of, or I guess my question is, like, you know, where did your love of mixing, this notion of love of sound come into your life? Because, you know, I mean, I'm not an engineer. I mean, I've done radio for many years, and obviously I've worked behind the soundboard myself. But obviously, I'm nowhere near the type of level that you are. So my love of sound started, you know, early on. I did some, you know, I was in bands, and then I did radio, etc. Like, where did your love start out for you? Like, where did that begin with you? Did it start out in the music room and things of that nature?
Well, in the music room, yes, in elementary school, believe it or not. So I was very shy growing up. One of the reasons was that I wasn't born here. I was born in Argentina. So I came here when I was 5 years old, and I didn't speak English. So I started off being really shy. So somewhere around second grade, I believe it was, we used to have music class, right? And used to do these holiday concerts, and I refused to sing. So I remember my teacher, God, what was her name? Mrs. Marion. That was her name. And she had one of those, and I don't know how old everyone is. I'm 46, so we'll talk about those.
We've all got you.
Yeah,
by a little.
So we all have a bunch of Miss Marion.
Okay,
yes.
great. So you guys remember those old stackable stereos with the turntable on top, and then there used
Oh my God,
Of course.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
so hers had a 32 band graphic equalizer right below there, right? And I remember seeing this, and then it had cool colors where like every time the beat hit, like there was like some lights that went on.
Yeah, the lights would pop, etc. Exactly.
And I remember saying to her, I want to do that. And she's like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I'll handle playing the music for everyone, right? And I clearly remember this, and I don't know how like these memories as a kid are still there, but I remember tweaking those equalizers and being like, wow, if I move this one up, there's more bass. I didn't know it was bass, but it would say 60 hertz, 250 hertz, the high end.
So you were mixing you were mixing band concerts.
I mean, listen, I was mixing things that were already mixed already. I mean, it wasn't like I was doing it, but I was mixing, like, let's say we were singing, I don't know, some Christmas song, and it was on a cassette. My job was just to press play and stop, right? But I started using that equalizer, and I remember looking at my best friend, Mark, and I'm like, did you hear that? Look what I just did, and nobody knew what the hell I was doing. But that was the beginning for me. But I got really into guitar. And first, before that, I wanted to play the saxophone because I think once you hit third grade, you were allowed to pick an instrument, but everybody wanted saxophone or drums. Somehow I ended up with the clarinet, and I was a damn good clarinet player because my grandfather was really into classical music and old bebop, and apparently, who I never met, my great grandfather composed classical music in Argentina.
Wow.
Get out of here.
Yeah, so I didn't know this until later, but my grandfather kept bringing up, I mean, he was in Argentina. He didn't live here, but he used to say to me, oh, Benny Goodman. He used to say, Benny Goodman. That's all he used to say to me, right? So I was playing, I was good. I was really good. I played in the band. Never really loved the clarinet, but it was better than, the next option was the flute. So I ended up playing that. And then in 5th grade or 6th grade, they had this thing through the town where it was like 6 guitar lessons for, $50. And I turned to my mom. I said, I need to take lessons. So I just went in there, and I was really into like rock and heavy metal at the time. And I took guitar with this guy named Jamie Andreas, who could give a shit about me. I think he was just trying to make a buck. And I really didn't learn much, but I did learn like a blues scale. And I took that blues scale and I started teaching myself. And that became my first. I did want to become a rock star, obviously. And
Who doesn't?
I learned early on that didn't happen. I remember being with a band and a bunch of people showed up to our rehearsal and I froze. And
Oh,
I said,
no.
"Whoop, I'm not going to perform in front of people." But in 6th grade, a buddy of mine made me a cassette, and on one side was Slayer was dubbed on it, and on the other side was Run DMC, Raising Hell. And I remember researching it at the time, at the time it was like MTV. And I remember hearing about this gentleman named Rick Rubin. And I said, man, he did both of that. So I find out that it's like some like white Jewish guy from Long Island. And I said, oh my God, who is this mysterious Rick Rubin? And at that point I said, I want to do what he does, but I didn't know what he did. So fast forward after high school, not even high school. Let's get into high school. I was a jock. And
What did you play?
what did I play? I played soccer was obviously my first love. So I played soccer in high school. I played traveling team in the fall. Spring. It was lacrosse. And other than in baseball at times, like I played baseball a lot, but I wasn't really I still have a real love for baseball, but soccer was my first thing. And lacrosse was great because my best friend was into it. And 2 of his brothers played Division I, and one of them was like one of the best college players at the time. He played for Syracuse, and they won like all 4 years of like the national.
He must have been good. Cuse's program is unbelievable.
I mean, he played with the two famous lacrosse players called the Gate brothers, the twins that pretty much.
I remember they
invented,
played for the Buffalo. I think they played for the Buffalo team, which is where I grew up. They were great.
They did. Right, and my buddy's brother played for the Denver Rifles professionally, so it was the same league. So I was, just by default, he's like my brother, so like I used to play lacrosse. So I got caught by the lacrosse coach. We had we had a smoking section, and I got caught smoking a cigarette. So I was kicked off, and I remember my dad said to me that I need to find an activity to do after school. And I was walking by the auditorium. We had this beautiful auditorium in high school. And the next thing I know, I looked and I see this thing, a console in the back. And I remember asking the guy, I said, "What is that? And who works that?" And he goes, "Me, but I'm looking for someone. Just happened to be at the right place at the right time." I said,
"Look at that.
I'll do that." It wasn't really what I wanted to do because I'm not a live, audio guy. So I did it. And I was EQing and doing things. I don't know if it sounded good, but nobody complained, except for the time that I forgot to shut one of the guy's lab mics, and he went into the bathroom. And it must have been like 700 people. I don't even want to tell you. So I remember that clearly. So anyway, so that was the start. Now I infused Rick Rubin into it. And at some point, Metallica came out with a double VHS. For the people that don't know what VHS are, do your research. And it was the making of the Black Album. And I watched that so many times. I studied it. My mother was just, every time she'd walk into the living room, I was watching it. And I became fascinated with what I learned was the recording studio. And I said, wait, so you can do something in music, be famous, but not be known because I don't like attention. I've never liked attention. I never got into it for any type of attention other than just, I love the studio. It's like home for me. I feel so comfortable in the studio, no matter where in the world. And I watched that and I became fascinated. And it was at that point I said, I want to do what they do. And I still didn't have an idea. So right after high school, I wasn't a great student in 12th grade, and I said, my idea was to go to community college and then go to NYU because there wasn't that many programs. And Larry and I were talking about this, that, I think Lowell, Massachusetts, and
University of
NYU
Massachusetts at Lowell. Yep. NYU was one. Sure.
Purchase had one.
Miami was a great recording school.
Miami was one. I know like some great engineers that came out of there.
Larry, you got your PhD at Lowell, is that right?
So,
Ariel, every once in a while I got to whip out my degree and show these guys that I am a music performance major with an emphasis in sound recording from the University of Massachusetts at Lowell. And they make fun of me. Could you imagine?
We get reminded every other episode
to tell us this.
Every once in a while,
I love
Ariel.
it, man. I love it. Hey, man, I believe you. Don't worry about it. I'm the one that matters.
So Ariel, sorry for cutting you off. So NYU, please. Is that where you went next?
That's where I wanted to go.
Okay.
So what happened was I took an AV class as one of my classes at college, at the community college, and the guy had a soundboard in the back, and the teacher said to me, every day after class, I would just sit there and fidget with it. And he's like, "Is that something you want to do?" And I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Audio engineer." And I said, "What's an audio engineer?" And he goes, "Let me do this. Let me connect you with my son. I'll give you his number. Call him." And he's an audio engineer. So I remember calling this guy up, and he said, "So what do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to be an audio engineer." And he goes, "Well, if you want to do that, what's your plan?" So I told him my plan. He goes, "Well, you could do that, and after 5 years, clean bathrooms, or you can go to this school for 9 months and clean bathrooms." And me being the lazy one that I am, I mean, in some regards, I'm like, I'm going to go there for 9 months. So there was a school that closed down about 3 years ago, I believe it was now. It was the first specialized audio school in the nation. It was called the Institute of Audio Research. It opened up in 1968. It was on University Avenue between, I believe it was
right in Manhattan.
Yeah, 9th and 10th Street, I think it was. if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
I kind of remember this place. I kind of remember that name.
Yeah, there used to be like a big
AIR.
flag.
They were
IAR,
Yeah.
and then they had the D'Agostino was downstairs. That's how I remember the D'Agostino. So I remember I told my dad, and my dad, my dad's very Argentinian, very, came here with nothing and worked his ass off multiple jobs, and he is one of these people that's like, as long as you make a paycheck, and and you can support yourself, great. So we go for a meeting with the head of the school, and I remember my dad asked him, how much can I expect my son to make? And my dad has a very thick Argentine accent. He says to my dad, he goes, he'll be lucky to make 5 1/4. My dad looked at me and says, you better make more than that, right? And I remember we walked out of there that day and we went to get breakfast, and my dad's like, you really better make more money than that. I think my parents still think that, this is all a joke at some days. I don't know. So I went there I started at Institute of Audio Research in August of 1996. And previous to that same summer, my father got me and my brother a ticket to go to Argentina, and I graduated high school in 95. And I went to Argentina, and I remember my grandfather and uncle did some research, and I ended up going to see this studio in Argentina. It was a very famous studio. I got a tour of it. And that obviously made me even more excited. And the guy says, if you ever want to move here, I'll give you a job. And I said, I don't think so, but thank you. And I went there. I started at an Institute of Audio Research. And this was what actually my best friend, Mark, and he was going to FIT, and we decided to get student housing together. And there was a student housing building on 57th and 9th on the corner. It's now called the Hudson Hotel. It's a fancy hotel. Back then, it was more of a crackhead hotel.
So not as fancy.
Literally. I mean, when I tell you guys, listen, my next door neighbor, ready for this, was Nipsey Russell.
Oh.
And he lived in
So how can you say it wasn't fancy?
No, his apartment, sadly enough, rest in peace, Nipsey. It was like a box apartment, and
Wow.
his furniture was like milk crates. I'm not even making this up. True story. So anyway, I went there about 2 weeks into school. I thought I was like, oh, this is it. This is audio. I'm going to love it. And they'd start talking about electricity and all this other nonsense, which I regret not studying now. But 2 weeks into school, I was looking for an internship. I said, I need to do an internship, because they were talking to us about an internship after you're done. I said, I can't do an internship then. I got to start now. So I was looking inside my CD covers, and I was into the Dave Matthews Band. And I looked up there in one of their albums, and I saw Green Street Studios, NYC. So I called up.
I remember that place.
And I'll never forget.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it was down, on 110 Green Street. And I called up, and this woman picked up, British accent. Sophie was her name. And I said, hey, I'm looking to see if you guys are looking for any young guys to clean the toilets over there. And she starts laughing. She's like, you're hired. And I said, well, how do you know you can trust me? I could be a murderer. She goes, I don't think so. Not if you want to clean toilets. So I said, okay. So I started the next day. I got out of school at 1:15. By 1:30, I walked my ass over there, and I was there. And I was there for 9 months. And during that time, I met one of my mentors. I got to meet Dave Matthews. I got to sit in on sessions with from everyone from Pete Rock to Steve Lillywhite, who produced U2, and Dave Matthews and Fish and all these others. And it was the best thing. So they would say, if you clean and make coffee and all this stuff, you can sit in a room and, use the patch bay and run Signal and, all of that. So I learned on my own, and that's kind of what I did. And I had a bit of an ego, because after 9 months, I'm like, am I going to become an assistant engineer? Because that's the next step, is you become an assistant. And when you become an assistant, your job as an assistant engineer is you need to know every piece of equipment. You need to know how to run the console better than the engineer. So I got the
Yeah, let me stop you right there. Let me stop you right there because you're right. You do need to know it better because what's happening is you know the room, and then these outside engineers would come in, and you would have to be the guy who shows them, oh, that's over there. This, what do you need? Reverb? I'll punch that up for you. You needed to know these rooms because the guy who was ahead of you was usually an independent contractor coming in. So you were representing Green Street. I just want to say to you, Green Street, I tried to get an internship there, and they rejected me, degree and all. Wow. So it's something you got.
Did you
the
not have
inside
your
scoop
PhD
to
at
just
that time?
say
you should have used the toilet.
I guess I just didn't offer to clean the
went
toilets.
the wrong way.
Excuse, right?
That's exactly
Obviously,
right.
because he had his
Oh my God.
PhD. He's like, my name is Dr. Larry Shea.
Oh
I am
my
way
God,
above
hilarious.
cleaning toilets at this
Stop
moment.
it. Stop it. So hold on. So you're at Green Street, and then you're there for a short period of time, 9 months, I think you said. How do you get to Puffy's? You go to Puffy's next,
so
right?
Puffy's happened very interestingly. I mean, there's like longer stories before that, but that'll take too long. But I grew up, and now I live in Suffern, New York, which is about 45 minutes from Midtown on with no traffic. And I grew up here, and there used to be a studio here called Bear Track Studios, and it was owned by Jay Beckenstein from Spyro Gyra. And it was a very famous studio. To this day, the most gorgeous studio I've ever been in. It was in the middle of Harriman State Park in the woods. And it was like, I mean, this guy had a pool with a grotto and like a basketball court and an old wine cellar built into the mountain that they turned into a reverb chamber. And I mean, it was like the creme de la creme, right? So I called up there to get, because I couldn't imagine, my parents were like, we can't afford to send you into the city when you're not making any money, right? Because I didn't grow up with any, we didn't have money growing up, and so I called up this studio and I said, are you guys looking for any help? They're like, no, but we're looking for a secretary. I said, look, I may not be the best looking secretary, but I can do the job. What are you looking for? They're like, well, we're looking for someone from 6 p.m. until the clients are done. I said, bet, I'm in. So I was getting paid $7 an hour. And
things are getting
more
better.
It's more than 5 1/4.
Hey man, I made it right at that point. and I was sleeping in my own bedroom at my parents' house. So it was a win. And so I got the job there, and I became, I was always calculated in the business. Everyone said you should get in with the engineer. I got in with the assistant engineer. And when I got in with him, we became close, this guy named Rick. And Rick said to me, I plan on leaving here within a few months. I said, wow, what are they going to do for assistant? He's like, I'm going to train you. And when it was time to go, Rick basically told them, like, Ariel's the guy. He knows the room inside and out. And it wasn't an easy room at all. It was probably the hardest room I worked in. They were very specific about everything, So I ended up working there for a few months and did well. And then I got fired for mislabeling a DAT tape or something like that. It was crazy. Like I forgot to label the last song on the safety. There was a master and a safety. And I got fired. The manager there, who shall remain nameless, apologized to me years later after I came in as an independent contractor in a big facility he was managing in Manhattan for an A-level artist. But that's a whole nother thing. But he basically admitted that
it wasn't me, guys. It wasn't me.
It wasn't the doctor.
So we all are clear.
So I ended up, I got fired, and the next day I sent out 45 resumes. But the funny thing was that all the resumes I sent out, I realized I wasn't putting them face down.
Oh no, you were setting blank pieces of paper.
Oh my God, no, get out of here.
So yes, so the next day I resent them, and within 15 minutes, I had a pager at the time. I wasn't dealing drugs. I just wanted to be cool at the time. So I got a pager, and I see this number come up, and I call up, and they're like, this is Daddy's House Recording Studios, and you sent us a resume. Could you come in for an interview on Friday? And I think this was like on Wednesday. So I remember I went to Banana Republic and bought like an outfit to wear, which I don't think I needed, but probably helped me get the job. And I went in. It was in August, and I'm in like a partial suit, and I went in. They did one interview with the manager, and then she said, and this was her totally testing me. She's like, come back in 4 hours and you're going to interview with the head assistant. I said, you want me to be outside? She goes, yes. So I come back, I got like, sweat marks all over, and I'm like ready to go. And they hired me. So I got the job there in August of 97. It was around that time. No, it's 98. I can't even remember, man. Time is so fucked up. All I remember was I started the cutting room in 99 or something like that. So I got to so I worked at Puffy's. I got the gig. One day that I was an intern, they asked me, do you know how to set up a microphone? I said, yep. I set up a microphone. The next day I'm assisting and I'm on salary. And I loved it. I worked my ass off. They loved me there. And this is a good segue to how I met Larry. There was an engineer named Ken Lewis. Puffy had a group of engineers that, were the same guys over and over. So you built a relationship with them, and all of them liked me because I gave a shit, right? I really cared about what I did, and I wanted to make everything go smooth. I had a great relationship with Puffy because I wasn't a yes man. I never was. I was always honest about things. Everyone around him was like, yeah, that's great. That's great. And then he'd look at me, what do you think? And I'm like, I don't think it's good. And he'd be like, that's what I'm talking about. He's not a yes man. So I met Ken Lewis. He did a session for Missy Elliott, tracking vocals. And he asked me, he's like, hey man, you're really good as an assistant. Do you have a resume? Always carried resumes on me. And this time they weren't blank. So I gave him a resume. And months went by, I didn't hear anything. And I got my first paid vacation in that summer. And I trust me, I wasn't getting paid that much. I was putting in like 80 hours a week, and I was getting under $400 a week living in New York. And I was on vacation, and I get a call. My pager goes off, and I call up, and Dr. Larry Shea calls me, and and
the rest, as they say, is history.
We got your resume from Ken Lewis, and we want to see if you'd be interested in taking this job. And I said, I got to get back to you. And my manager at Puffy Studio I adored her. She was the meanest person, but she had your back. She was mean in the sense that she just pushed you to be the best you can be.
Right.
But she always had your back no matter what, and you couldn't lie to her.
That's great. Honestly, that's great.
So I remember calling her, and I said, Felicia, I don't know how to tell you this, but I got a job they want me to start next week, and I don't know if I'm going to take it because I'm not giving you 2 weeks notice. She goes, I think it was that Friday I got called to go in on Monday to meet with Ken. And they were at the time they were finishing up at Electric Lady Studios with Mike Mangini, the producer. And that's where I was going to interview with them. So I remember going in. I remember Felicia says to me, if you don't take the job, I'm going to fire you. She goes, I always told you, This is a stepping stone. This is not a career.
Wow.
So,
okay, hold on. Let me, because this is big though, because see, we were, I don't want to say desperate for good recording engineers. We had some guys, and we had a main room and we had a B room. But, when all things were in flux, when we would have 4 sessions a day, you can't keep your engineer on that next session. So we needed guys, we needed a rotation. But we, bigger than that, needed somebody who was going to buy into the cutting room family. So our audience doesn't know this. So I was the studio manager of Cutting Room Recording Studios for about 3 years. And I remember getting your resume from Ken Lewis and the owner, Dave Crafa. Dave, big shout out. And him saying to me, like, you got to get someone hired, man. And I called you, and I basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but I was like, I need you to start next week, or I'm going to move to the next name on my list, essentially, because I had to get that job done. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember clearly that it was like, we need you by next week, And, what people don't know is I think me working at Puffy's, that was the hardest job I've ever had, because you're dealing with, it was funny, when Puffy was there, my job became easier because there was one Puffy.
Oh,
when
interesting.
Puffy wasn't there during the day, everybody wanted
I
to
get that. And I understand that 100%.
Right? There was everyone had an ego, and you were dealing with egos. So that was hard. So I remember going in, met Ken. I think afterwards I walked over to the cutting room. I met Larry and Dave, and I dropped everything and I got the job. And I remember the first week I was there, I said, wow. I remember, I think one session ended at 11, and everybody's like, all right, we're going to close up. Who's going to do the alarm tonight? And I'm like, wait, what? You know, because I never left. You know, when I left Puffy's, it would be when his security would call up and be like, Mr. Combs is asleep.
Wow.
And he'd be like, everybody can go home now. And you're like, what? You know, okay. So it was like 4 or 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning. And then I'd have to come back by 10 or 11. And times I would sleep at the studio under the console to get the heat from the tubes, literally. So I remember like the cutting room was like a walk in the park to me. That first week, I was like, oh my God. This is the best job ever. I was like, everybody's so nice. Like me and Larry hit it off like right away. I hit it off with everybody there. There used to be the head engineer. There was this guy named Nasty, who I'm still very good friends with. Right? I still talk to Nasty all the time.
I do too.
And Nasty still,
I do too. One of my favorite people.
He's still to this day, like we talk about it, and he's like, you were like he would always, Ariel needs to be on my sessions, Ariel. And I remember with Nasty sessions, it was so easy. I'm like, okay, all I got to do is set up and he just needs to press record and it's all good. And when he mixes.
Well, because a big part of what you do for a job is making the client happy. Like it's not an easy job, right? These guys are artists. They come in, they want to do their art and create their music, but you know, it's very easy to do something that maybe they're not happy with. So when you find somebody who's good at what they do, like you, like Nasty, and someone who in the morning, I would read in the log, man, client is thrilled. Can't wait to start again tonight or whatever.
Right.
You know, that matters. And that's not an easy thing to do.
The logs.
We had logs.
Yes,
that's right.
I forgot
we knew it happened everywhere.
So I have 2 questions.
Sure.
First is, I guess for both of you, but Ariel, please take it since you're our guest today. First, the cutting room, to me, is a very, very famous place that people who are passionate about music are aware of. But for those people who don't know music and may not be as dug in, what's the history of the cutting room and what makes it so special?
I will hand that off to Larry because the history. I mean,
Wow.
I would give the Cliff Notes version of it, but Larry and Dave are very close friends. Well, I mean, from what I understand was that it was like a studio that was started in an. Larry, correct me if I'm wrong. Was it an apartment building? In an apartment?
No, NYU dorm room. Very much like Rick Rubin. NYU dorm room. Yep.
And, you know, and it was just a very grassroots and, you know, built up from the ground up. And, you know, as more space was needed. When I came in, they were changing consoles. And Larry, you might not even remember this. You specifically needed somebody that knew the SSL console.
SSL.
Right.
Yeah, that was a big selling point. Do you know the SSL? So I'll just say this about Cutting Room because it's an amazing place, and we really want to get Dave Crayfon, the owner, because that studio is still running right now, and we're going to get him on a future show. But he started it out of his dorm room, and this is a guy who built it from nothing, you know, like a piece of equipment here, a piece of equipment there. I had been working for Steely Dan from like 94 to 97, I want to say. Anyway, doesn't matter. But I'm working for Steely Dan, so I knew what a professional recording studio environment should be. And when I went and was hired to be the manager at Cutting Room, they were doing a lot of things right, but they could have been more professional and stepped it up a bit. And I think I helped them bring things from the studio that I was at before, River Sound, Steely Dan studio, and say, hey, you guys could do this and you could do that and you can make more money doing it this way. And I think everything stepped up and we kind of got Dave on his way, and then he took the ball and scored 20 touchdowns essentially. So Cutting Room is an amazing place. A lot of great music happened there. A lot of legendary
And there was an expansion, right?
There,
when
so.
we were there, they expanded to the back room and built the other room. So there was a lot of great people that came out of there, great engineers, great producers. And
what are some examples? Ariel, can you run through some of the names and some of the artists that would work out of there?
I mean, everyone from like Black Eyed Peas to, and that's a
Mobb Deep,
Big Pun.
So many.
To
Wu-Tang. All the Wu-Tang crew came through there.
Man Who Let the Dogs Out. There was, I mean,
That's Mike Mangini, too, right?
I mean, it just goes.
And Bruce Hornsby, a lot of,
right.
Great people.
Right. So, I mean, that's
Great
just
people.
like just touching the surface. But what's funny is I actually did the Black Eyed Peas session thanks to Larry. And that was interesting because, you know, I spent a week with those guys and I realized, like, you know, a lot of people didn't give them credit, but man, they are super talented. I remember we filled the live room up with instruments, just like Rhodes and B3s and like guitars and basses and 2 drum kits set up and all this. And I was like, what's this for? And he's like, oh, Will.i.am. He loves playing live instruments and he'll just jump from one to the next. And I remember like, wow, that's crazy. And he did. But, you know, for me, I think, you know, Larry touched upon it. Like, it's very important, the vibe of the place. And the cutting room was a beautiful facility. And there was a lot of beautiful facilities, but the vibe there was just incredible. And it showed, you know, the people, for me, the people in the facility is what helps the vibe out. The minute you put bad people in a place, it all goes downhill. And we had this beautiful synergy there that to this day, it was my favorite job out of any studio I worked at. There was this dream I had at the time that it would have lasted forever. And, you know, we'd be growing old together and getting AARP magazines and stuff like that.
You and me both, Ariel.
You know, so I do get them now, but that's a whole nother conversation. So you know, it was a beautiful time. And I learned, you know, that's where I sort of started engineering more and getting the opportunities to be, you know, getting tracking gigs. And Larry would be like, are you, and you know, the thing that was interesting was Larry always made me feel like I can talk to him. And if I didn't feel comfortable, we would have conversation like, you know, I don't feel comfortable doing this session. I think someone else should do it. Or, you know, I mean, it was an open thing. And I didn't feel like if I spoke to him, I would get fired for being honest. And that was like a big deal for me. And it made everything better. And I wanted to work harder for the studio. And I was there for a while. And then, you know, things took a turn and I ended up leaving there. And I think at that point I got a job at a studio called RPM Studios.
Ariel, before we move on to RPM, I want to kind of ask a quick question in there. Like this notion of, as you said, the vibe. I agree. The vibe in any place makes it function better or worse. 100% correct. So this notion of, you know, if I didn't feel comfortable with a client, what does that mean precisely? And like what I kind of mean is that, okay, as a mix engineer, as a recording engineer, I mean, how much input do you have in the client? I guess my real question is, you know, it comes down to this notion of, is the customer always right? That, you know, if they say, since it's, you know, they pay their way, if they say, you know, it's going to say, we want to play it, we want to record it this way, and you say, no, I think it'll sound better this way. How far do you push it with your input to say, I think this will help accentuate your art form that much better?
That's a great question. So at the time I was very young and I didn't have that kind of power. So when I would approach Larry about things, it was more about the client maybe having a higher caliber client that I just didn't feel comfortable doing the session yet.
Okay.
Later on in my career, people were booking me because of my say when they recorded. Does that make sense?
Because you said that about you with Puffy, right? Because Puffy seemed to appreciate your candor.
He did. Puffy appreciated the fact that I made the room function without anyone thinking. And I'm talking about little things like there was always notepads on each table with 2 sharpened pencils. And the notepads were not like almost gone. They were new notepads. And if someone needed to write something down, whatever, if you heard a client saying, yo, man, I don't know, what do you think we should eat? I grabbed the pen and paper and said, hey, are you guys ready for a food order? I'll take it and go pick it up for you. If I hear Puffy saying, I don't know, man, I might want to add ad libs to this, I would run into the live room and make sure that the Sony C800 mic was set up and it was patched, ready to go. Like, those are the things I was doing early on. But with the cutting room, I was starting to transition as a recording engineer. But the irony of it was that the guys that were working there, the producers and engineers that were working there, like on staff, were asking me to mix. Like Nasty, for instance, was an artist and he was the head engineer. And I remember Nasty was having me mix his stuff at night on off hours, because that was the beauty of the cutting room. That was the one thing about the cutting room that separated it from most other studios, is that you were encouraged to use the studio on off hours. And that's where you started building your grit and your skill and everything else to get confident behind the console and the speakers. So Nasty was having me mix his artist stuff and his all of his stuff he was asking me to mix. And that's where I started getting the confidence.
That was part one of our conversation with Ariel Borujow. Larry, thank you so much for setting that up for us.
Yeah, Ariel's such a special guy. I love sharing my friends when they have a story like that. I mean, he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty and start from the bottom. I mean, that's what I love about this story, right? Is he calls up a place and says, I'm going to clean your bathrooms. I mean, how great is that? But, he's not afraid. He has a dream. He sees, the Metallica video and the Rick Rubin stuff, and he gets this spark and finds his place in the world and isn't afraid to work from the bottom up. I mean, I talked about it in the open. This is an intimidating profession sometimes. And part of that is dealing with artists, right? And dealing with big stars and big egos and big celebrities. And he's not intimidated by that. And that allows him to just do the job, but do it in an artistic way, and to be a person that people want to work with. And ultimately, when we have that kind of a thing going on, you're going to get a lot of work, you're going to get booked, and you're going to be very successful.
I think we once said in another interview with someone that, a lot of times you just have to prove that you're not a moron, right? If you can do that, a lot of times.
Tushar, we're still waiting on you, just so you know.
Okay, look, I'm not going to argue that sometimes, but look, if you can prove that, look, you have a good enough idea as to what you're doing, people begin to trust you, and then if people can just deal with you, that's sometimes more than 50% of the job. But after that, if you can prove that you have a great deal of skill, like Ariel has proven, right? And I love those stories. Like, you know what? When I had to, sometimes when I was working with Puffy, I would sleep in the studio underneath the board just to get warmth from some of the tubes. I know what that was like. I did that once. Not to the extent of like Ariel. Obviously, I'm nowhere near that kind of level. No, none of us are. I mean, this guy's on another level than the rest of us. But I understand that kind of mentality. It's not easy, and you have to. And what he is obsessed, right? He's obsessed with doing the job. He's obsessed with getting better. And I love this notion of like that moment you find that spark, whatever it is, that it ignites in you. And then you're obsessed with trying to get better at it. You're obsessed with trying to discover what it means. And then you become obsessed with trying to become better at it every single moment of every single day.
Absolutely. I was going to say something similar, which is just say yes, which is the theme that keeps coming up in so many of these conversations. He was willing to, sweep the floors, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing, moving beyond that I thought was very mature on his part, it was to not get caught up in the money, which is so difficult to do when you step into any career, because you've been going to school, you've been paying your tuition, you haven't had any money, you've been sacrificing for so long, you're ready to start living, at least in some cases, even in your early 20s, a better life. And to have the wherewithal and the confidence to say, you know what? Nope, not yet. I know where I'm headed. I know what sacrifices I have to make. I know what this process feels like it should be. And I'm in. And the fact that he was willing to take $5.50 an hour to get in a door just to start his journey is worthy of a great deal of respect.
he has a tireless work ethic, and you can just hear it in the way he tells this passionate story, right? And I knew that when I hired him. That's, I just saw it every day that he came in, as you said, T, his passion about getting better at this. And to be honest with you, I threw him in the fire a lot because I knew he was capable of it. He was a great engineer and a great person to work with. And I just knew that if he got a little exposed, that people would come back and want to work with him more, and he would grow. And if I played a little fraction of that in his career, where I gave him that confidence to maybe go do something that he wasn't maybe willing to do beforehand, good. I pushed him off the diving board into the ocean. You know what I mean?
Well, it feels like a lot of different people taught him that. He learned that in Puffy's studio. It sounds like he was doing just about everything, and he kept saying yes. But to his credit, he also, it sounds like, was willing to say no. He was willing to push back a little bit and give a little bit of an honest opinion when appropriate, which shows a lot about the character and who he is. So that was part one of our conversation with Ariel Borujow. Part two will focus on his ascension within the field, dig into his day-to-day, and shine a light on how someone becomes a master of their craft. Thank you so much for joining us, Ariel. We also thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the show, please tell your friends, click follow on your podcasting platform, and give us a 5-star rating. Also, if this episode or others inspired you to think of someone interesting in your life who could be a great guest on the show, please send us a note via the contact form on NoWrongChoices.com. On behalf of Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea, I'm Larry Samuels. Thank you again for joining us, and remember, there are no wrong choices on the road to success. We learn from every experience.